What's going on? For those of you that don't know me, I am Micah Van Rijs. I used to be at HubSpot working with Steve here. Steve, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we can dive in a little more into what we have in Score, which is lead scoring.
Sure. Micah, first off, thanks so much for taking the time today. Super appreciate you joining me to dive into lead scoring, at least at a high level, and what improvements we've made here in HubSpot. A little bit more about me. My name's Steve Richards. I'm a senior inbound consultant on the pro services team here at HubSpot. Micah was one of my former colleagues as well, and one of the things I miss the most is our little Slack brainstorms whenever we would release new tools. And we still do that. And we figured, why don't we put a little webinar together to kind of, at least show some of the things that we're thinking about when we talk about lead scoring, at least at a high level with our customers, how to leverage this tool and then put it into action. So, Micah, looking forward to diving in with you.
Yeah, definitely. You and I have been chatting about lead scoring back and forth. I mean, I think since inbound now, and like texting back and forth on it. So I'm excited to see kind of like what you have been seeing, at least from your side of things, and then, bouncing some of the ideas that we've been talking about back and forth, maybe in a more public way.
Absolutely. I think like a good place for us to start this conversation is just like at least a high level or kind of basic level overview of like what lead scoring is and how it can be beneficial to your org, right? And I think the best place to start with that, again, is just it's a more refined way of being able to segment the different contacts or companies that currently live in your database. A common roadblock that I see with HubSpot customers is we're getting all of this great data that's coming into HubSpot, but how can we actually put that data to use and actually action it? And my typical answer to that, at least now, with what we've built in HubSpot from a scoring perspective, I know we're calling it lead scoring, but I think you could actually leverage this even at different parts of the journey through a funnel, depending on your company's use case. But those are a couple of things, at least at a high level, Micah, that I think of, or at least that I think comes to my mind when I hear lead scoring, but curious to get your take as well.
Yeah, I mean, like the old way of doing it inside of HubSpot, right, was like building out these score properties by hand, and then like it was so daunting because you would need to find every little thing buried in properties and like put them in and assign point values. Where like, now, at least from my like looking into the tool and like the conversations that I have had, it like is way more intuitive, and it becomes less daunting. And you don't necessarily fall into those pitfalls of like trying to cram everything into one score, which is what a lot of people were doing beforehand. Now, right, with the new tool, you were telling me you get what, like 50 different scores. So that means you can be a lot more, targeted and, thoughtful about what you're scoring, how you're scoring, and when those scores apply, as opposed to like, hey, we're going to make a all-encompassing demographic score, all-encompassing psychographic score, and then an all-encompassing activity score, and then Frankenstein those into like an overall score based off of, whatever we collect.
Right. Couldn't agree more. I think it's a great way to put it, and what I mean by that is there's a reason. So at Enterprise, you get 50. I believe at Pro, it's 20 or 25. It's one of the two.
Yeah, don't hold us to your research.
Regardless if you're Pro or Enterprise, right? I like to call out that you have that many scores available because that's kind of the way our team was thinking about this, hearing a lot of feedback from HubSpot customers of like, we really would like to be able to be more targeted at specific points of our buyer's journey. And that's something I like to call out because I do think it's a bit different than maybe how folks have thought about lead scoring historically, right? Like what you were saying right there is something that I think you and I both ran into quite a bit, which is, like you said, creating, using this legacy score properties and then a workflow. And it was a lot of moving.
It's messy.
This, I think, to your point, I think saying it's less daunting too is accurate, at least to me. When you go in it, the UI is a bit cleaner, and there's, I think, a lot of kind of solid quality of life improvements in the tool itself that makes it, I think, a bit more scalable and a bit easier to manage. Whether you're a marketer Or something else I've been calling out to folks is whether you're a marketer or let's say I'm a BDR or an AE on the sales team, like that to me is another use case for this, right? Like
100%.
speaking from past experience, I've been an AE in the past. I've been a BDR in the past. Something that would have been really beneficial to me was a way to flag those intent signals and within my target, group of whether that's contacts, companies, whatever it is, the leads that I'm kind of responsible to go after, finding a better way to show who and where, like just getting through that clutter, I think would have been awesome for me.
Right.
Like I actually, funny enough, just got off a call right before this where I was talking with a sales team about this kind of exact type of use case, right? Like how can I make my kind of prospecting team or BDR team's job easier? And this to me is one of the ways that you can do that in HubSpot for sure.
Yeah. And, I can see a world too where like as we become more comfortable with this and like figure out more outside the box use cases, thinking about just scoring in general and not just leads, like, from a delivery and CS side, right? Having the ability to look at a score and see and if an account is like ghosting your account managers, based off of activity and like not engaging. And then you think about like bringing in a tool like Amplitude, to, also help with track, engagement there. And there's some really powerful stuff, right? Because it costs way more to go find a new customer than retain, one that you already have.
Couldn't agree more. Right there with you. Now, I think we covered at least a few common maybe like misconceptions or pitfalls. And I wanted to call out a couple more, at least that I see, because this is something that I feel like I've talked to our customers about, and I've been at HubSpot for almost 3 years. I would say almost on a weekly basis, lead scoring comes up. And I think one of the things that we called it out a little bit earlier, but I'll call it out again. Just get in there and play around. Don't be overwhelmed or daunted by like all of the functionality that's there. I think something that can happen is like almost getting like blocked, if that makes sense, right? Like you're like, am I considering every signal? Start small and iterate, right? Like that's something that I always encourage when building out these different scores is kind of cast a wider net and then drill it down, right? Like you've got to start somewhere, right? Like, and don't let that like fear, I guess, stop you from putting this in place, right? That's one of the, I think, common, maybe it's not necessarily a misconception, but
I think it is though, like, I have those same conversations and I still do. Like when I was at HubSpot and like working with clients, we talked about that all the time, right? Like there's so much, paralysis by analysis of what you need to actually like include in your score to then, build it out. And you want to have it perfect from the get-go. Whereas like, I think this applies to a lot of business just in general, like, start and iterate, right? Like you're never going to see results if you don't actually do something. So, just actually like starting and going from there, is the best course of action. And you can always refine that, right? And there are a lot of ways that you can run reports to see broadly what are some, activities that everybody is doing. But I have a feeling, from that phase, we're going to get more into that.
So one of the cool things with our new tool, there is built-in reporting on trends. That comes with it, which is really nice, right? Because I think back in the legacy version of this environment, to your point, yes, you could get exactly that. Go into Custom Report Builder, or I guess you could do it as a single object if you wanted to, but
no,
agreed. And you'd say, okay, give me like an average. What is it? That now comes out of the box, which is really nice. Another improvement we made is on whatever object it is that you're scoring, so contact or company, we also have a card on the right-hand rail that will show you that contact score and kind of the history or trend, and also what impacted or what influenced that score. That's now out of the box functionality, which is really nice. Because I think historically you could go into a score property and like test a single contact, which
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
coming to the new tool as well. It's not there yet, but like being able to have that visibility, I think is really nice and can
Hmm.
be impactful where it's like, if you're in sales and you're maybe sorting by that score, it's like, well, what was it that actually contributed to this? Now you should be able to just click through on that and see like, okay, what
Right.
actually drove this score, which I think could help with the messaging mate from a messaging standpoint, right? Of what you're going to send out to that person, or if you're going to call them,
100%.
what are you going to talk about? Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
definitely. Those are all great points, and I'm definitely excited to watch you test drive this thing a little bit. Because I've gotten to do it, but I have yet to be on this side of the table and watch someone else do it, which is a little different.
Yeah. So with that being said, let me go ahead and share my screen. Am I sharing the correct one?
Yep.
Correct.
Always an important question to ask.
It sure is. Okay. So, just a little housekeeping to start, where this lives within HubSpot. You can pop into marketing and lead scoring, and it'll take you right to this page, which again, it's its own module. It's not buried in a property somewhere, which is really nice. Again, I think that lends to the potential visibility of this to maybe other folks in the org as well. But what you can see, you're going to kind of have, you see here, I've created 13 out of 50. Been doing a lot of these, I think, demo conversations lately. But you can get a starting point for a score with AI. We may look into that a little bit later. In my personal portal, I just don't have a ton of data the AI is going to action. So we're going to look at manually creating one of these. And one brand new update, we're recording this on November 13th. This went live, I believe, last Friday. But I want to walk through kind of what these different options are and how they kind of work. So we've got an ability to create an engagement score, which again, that's going to ideally be flagging how that contact is engaging with different assets, whether that's ads, forms, custom events, anything in between that you'd be looking to use your engagement score for that. Then you've got your fit score, which again is ideally looking at either contact or company level properties to help determine what is the fit of this contact or company into the use case that I'm trying to, score for. Then this one that I've selected here is the combined score, which out of the box, it's going to combine the engagement and the fit kind of on a matrix. And Mike, I'm sure you've seen this in the past where we used to
Yeah.
build these in spreadsheets. That is now functionally possible in HubSpot, and this is the one that I want to show you and walk you through at least at a high level today. So we can say this is a test score with Micah on 11:13. All right, and let's jump into this. And I can kind of point out, at least at a high level, as we walk through some of the differences between
Mhm.
this new part of the tool and the legacy part of the tool, and kind of everything that is entailed with this new functionality. So I'll add an event kind of score here to kick us off. Right from the top, you can kind of say, okay, Micah, this is another new update. You can
Yeah.
actually set your scale all the way up to 500.
Wow. Yeah, that is big. I don't even think that was live as of Friday.
No,
Like
so
that range.
that's new. You can definitely range this up. Now, again, I will say though, as a best practice, I think it's easier and more scalable to use a 100-point scale. Now,
Agreed.
again, are there use cases for more?
Yes, but
Sure. But I think, again, as you're getting started, I'd recommend leaving this on the default. But again, totally dependent on your use case. Then you've got kind of the scoring group. And the way that these are kind of established, or the way that I like to think about this, is you could either score this by, let's just say these are our top of the funnel assets. Or you could potentially, I think there's an argument, Micah, to be made for grouping these by asset type. Be curious to get your perspective on that, or at least how you're grouping these different actions. Curious to get your take.
yeah. I think about it in a few different ways, and it kind of depends on the overall scoring methodology adopted by the organization,
Sure.
right? Top of funnel assets definitely make sense, and those tend to be more of like your evergreen campaigns
Mhm.
that you're running. Um, and so like having those there, makes sense. But other than that, right, like, breaking out by middle of funnel, bottom of funnel, but then also thinking about the different stages of your buyer's journey as well, right? Because those different things happen right? Like you might have different people that are actually like going through multiple of those stages in the buyer's journey at different points in the funnel, right? Like, because people come in at all different places, and as much as we like to think linearly, right? Like everyone comes in the top and then pops out the bottom, becomes an opportunity, and then you run with it and close it. That's not how life works, and you never know where people are going to stumble in. And so having different places where you can think about top of funnel, bottom of funnel, and then inside of that the buyer's journey has been pretty helpful, at least when I've been building these out in the past. If that makes sense, I think so. But
No, for sure. Um, so with that being said, at least for this example, we'll just kind of group these by asset for simplicity's sake. But
yeah,
you can say a couple other things to call out here, I think, that are different.
let's
Built-in
just talk about
time
that. Yeah,
decay, which is nice, right? So
yeah,
this again is saying it's looking at, okay, if we use this email click as an example, right? It's saying when the contact clicks the link in the email, let's say they're going to get 5 points. Okay, if we turn the decay on, we can say reduce this value by X% over this amount of time, right? So again, it's taking into consideration when that event or action took place and then kind of, devaluing that as time goes on, which I think is key when it
this
comes
is
to
this is
intent.
huge because you used to not be able to do this at all. So you'd
Yep.
have people that had like a score of 95 out of 100 that built up over 4 or 5 years in some databases, and they took a lot of their actions, either really front heavy or like in the middle, and then nothing really ever progressed outside of that. And so being able to have this decay on now is super helpful, because otherwise, right, like you had scores, but they weren't taking any of that into account, and it really wasn't a true representation of their scoring.
Exactly. Well said. And I think something else I wanted to call out, which is also new, is you can set kind of limits for these different groups of actions as well, which again, I don't necessarily think was a part of our out of the box functionality in the past. What I
Yeah,
mean by that is, hey, it's nice that they're engaging with our marketing emails, but how much do we really want to let those opens, for instance, dictate or weight against a more targeted action like an ad click, right? Like that's kind of one of the things I would pose folks to think about as they're building these out is
yeah,
like you can set those kind of limits to almost not let maybe less intentful type actions overtake or skew your score. Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah. You used to be able to kind of do that, right? You'd have to manually assign everything and then do the math and make it back out. But this is definitely a much more clear representation of that.
And let's say we can add another group for opens. Just pick an email here. And again, you can pick multiple different emails if you wanted to. Then, Micah, I don't know if you saw this. If you do pick multiple emails, and again, I think this would apply for like forms or, other asset types too. You could say, cool, score these all the same or flat, give them one. Or if you wanted to score each of these on its own, you could break that out.
Yeah, that's super nice.
Yeah,
That's you could do that, but you'd have to build out so much additional logic inside of the score. This is just a much better way of
yeah,
doing it, and like being able to have that inside of the group is a lot nicer.
for sure. And then the only other one, this is a nice improvement as well, which is marketing events. So like again, it's a newer object in HubSpot that you may or may not already be aware of if you're listening to this, but this is where you could potentially help leverage like, hey, and Micah, I'm sure you've never heard this. Sarcastic. How can I weight my conference attendees, or how can I, like this
Great
would
shows.
be a fairly straightforward way to go about doing that.
Yeah, and marketing events used to just be in general really hard to track inside of HubSpot.
Yep.
So that whole thing, which is a topic for another time, is great.
It is. I agree. But that's kind of at least at a high level the activity related scoring. Let me add some fit criteria too. And again, look, from a fit perspective, this is really nice because again, you can be looking at the contact object or associated objects, which is really nice. So if we wanted to look at company data, right? If we're thinking from a target perspective, maybe our company level insight is better than just the contact, right? So we can say like this revenue size or this employee size, you could pull that in here. The other piece, you're seeing pet, that's one of my custom objects. You also could look at, let's say in theory, you're piping in maybe user data from your software platform into HubSpot. You could look at the associated custom object that's housing that data to also help that influence your score. But curious, any thoughts, questions?
No, I think one important thing to call out here too is it makes it way easier when you're building out these fit things to evaluate a company and a contact at the same time, right? Because oftentimes we want to know, like you pointed out already, does the company match our, ICP or whoever we're going after? But then inside of that, right, you want to know if you're talking to the right person at the company, right? Like if you know that you typically talk to a director of marketing to purchase your services, well, then, you definitely want to score that job title higher or something similar, than, someone that fills it out that's an AE or a BDR, right? Like, kind of a lame example, but applicable, in a lot of, circumstances. And obviously you can get more in the weeds on, that with what you collect. But, that's one place where, this being able to group it out and look at the different objects for a contact score or even a company score, right, as separate things, is super helpful. And, we can get into it more later, right? But when you want to create a contact score versus a company score and then how those two work in tandem.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Then you do have the option to leverage associations here, which is nice. So
That's cool.
if you wanted to look at specific companies, again, depends on how advanced a use case we're talking about with your journey, I suppose, with HubSpot. But, that's nice. You could even average this if we're looking at a number of different associated companies, instead of just kind of summing this up, which is cool. Cool. And then let me jump kind of to these next two pieces, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think this is important to call out. Now, one of the things that I'm sure may get commented or asked is Steve, I see ways to add. I don't see ways to subtract points. It's coming. I believe that's Friday that goes into beta. Don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure though that is right around the corner, to be able to subtract points. We have heard that feedback. It is on the way. Don't want to set any dates in stone, but that there should be a kind of toggle here that should let you add or subtract, which is on its way, which is nice. That's the only other part I wanted to call out on this. Now next, why negative scoring brought me to this, or why I thought of that with this screen, Micah, is you can say, okay, give this score, apply it to all of my contacts, or should we just be scoring specific sets of contacts, right? So again, Micah, almost going back to what we talked about a little bit at the beginning today, is you can be a lot more specific with the scores that you create. And this, again, could help you from a who should get this score standpoint.
Yeah.
Curious to get your take on that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, thinking about this as, we've been talking back and forth over the last couple of weeks, right? Like, even just going back to like, I want to start lead scoring, where do I start, right? Like, using your customer list based off of life cycle stages, right, to find what your ideal scores are and your criterias, and allowing you to fine tune the score to mostly match your customers is a great place to start, in being able to do that here on this screen. And from there, right, you can reverse engineer the scores that actually matter for prospects and other things. So this functionality is really nice, because beforehand, it would just kind of blanket apply to everybody. Versus now you have that ability to kind of target it more as you're testing.
Agreed. And then a few other call outs within the settings, which I think are important, is this is our combined score, and it's actually going to kind of write these to new properties within HubSpot for you, right? So again, if you're wondering, like, Steve, I'm thinking about migrating off of, like, hey, we've used scoring already in the past. Have no fear. This is a new property that will be populated when you turn on this score, right? So you've got the total score, the fit score, and the engagement score, which are all going to write to corresponding properties on the back end. The other thing that, again, I just want to kind of tip my cap to our product folks, Andres Bustos, who's the product manager. Hat tip to you, my friend. This is really interesting, which is our score threshold properties. So again, like, Mike, I'm sure you've seen this type of grid in the past.
Made a lot of them.
Yep. I'm like, this image is almost like seared into my head. How to kind of formulate or operationalize a lead score, right? And like,
I think this is good though, because like, a lot of people, when they're starting with lead scoring, if they've never built out a model from scratch, or it's been a while, like, laying it out in this matrix, for a variety of different scores is a good way to visualize it and understand what they mean when you're putting in those thresholds, as opposed to just like arbitrarily being like, well, I've got 100 and therefore we're going to divide it into bands of 25, right? Like, that's not always best practice, and this helps you visualize that more.
Yeah. And I think the other kind of good point to call out here is, I think the use case for this threshold property, again, this will surface directly on records. It also is something that you could leverage within automation, right? So I could say, hey, when a contact is sitting within A1, they're a good fit and they're highly engaged. Cool, let's create a lead and make sure someone's getting after them right away, right? Like, that's just one almost simple type of use case, right? But like, this, I think, helps make actioning the lead score quite a bit easier. And what I mean by that is, in the past, this again is something that I've run into, again, at least anecdotally. And what I mean by that is, Steve, this is great. We've created the score, we have it, but like, what is it actually doing for us, right? Like, what actions are being taken by the score? Like, how are we actioning this data? This is something that else, again, it's a little bit more advanced, but something that I would charge customers to definitely dive into, because it can really, I think this is awesome. I was so pumped to see this. Again, you can call me a nerd, that's fine. But just knowing and working with a lot of HubSpot customers and how they think about lead score, I just think our product team did a good job of like hearing out like how marketers, how RevOps folks are thinking about this, and then really building it functionally into the tool, which is exciting. But curious to get any additional thoughts you might have on this piece.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of already touched on a lot of it, right? But like, use cases off the top of my head is right. Like, we have someone that's a great fit in A3, right? But they may have taken a couple engagements. Well, we need to try and like bump that engagement level up. And by looking at the different thresholds, right, hey, if they have, you are A threshold in fit, but maybe, your B threshold, or like your 2 threshold in engagement, right? like we need to start ramping up like either targeted ads or emails through workflows, right, to try and move them over in the matrix so that sales can engage them. So just a use case off the top of the head. I really want to quickly touch on when to use contact scores and when to use company scores and how to do them, because I know we're both coming up on top of the hour here.
Yeah.
And this structure is basically the same across both objects. So like what we just went over here works for companies as well, with slightly different properties. So I'd be curious on how you view using like company scores and contact scores in, conjunction with each other, or, when to use them separately.
It's a great question. I think the first question I ask, like when I would answer that with a question, I would say,
Classic
what's the data integrity of each object in your portal? Yeah. Right? Like so that's the first thing, at least at a high level, that I would ask, right? Is like, do we have a lot more company characteristics or contact? Yeah. Are we, that's going to, I think, vary depending on the use case and how the company is using HubSpot as a whole. That's one of the things I like to at least pose as a thought exercise is like, okay, do we have a lot more quality data on which object? Then I think that can help lead you towards which of these should we be considering first.
Yeah.
For our use case, I think at least at a high level, Micah, typically from what I see, like that company record typically is more intact, I think, or is more robust. So from like maybe a top of the funnel or prospecting use case, like should we at least start there to maybe identify better fit companies? That's one example, but curious to get your take on the difference between the two.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% on track there, right? Like you want to identify the differences, and especially when you think about like, again, this cracks open a whole other can of worms in another conversation, but like ABM, account-based marketing, right? You really want to focus on finding companies that have a better score there. And then like I mentioned earlier, right? Like once you identify the ones that have the companies that have a really good fit score, right? The engagement may be less important there, but like the fit score is really important. From there, right? Like the contact, fit, and engagement scores matter way more. So those three scores in conjunction with each other paint a clearer picture of, who you should be going after, when you should be going after them, and all of that different stuff. Because, right, like to my example earlier, if I'm a manufacturing company and I want the director of purchasing to, pick us up for one of the suppliers, again, like the fit of that person is really important, just as the, fit of the company is, and then, right, the engagement from there plays into it after that. And, a whole host of different things go into that, such as like how you're going after them, what channels and, content and all that type of stuff. But, like you mentioned, starting with company and then thinking about where are the different holes that we need to fill inside of each object is really important. And, going in and saying, this is how these work together so that we can get either the best at-bats for our salespeople or provide the most quality leads and qualified leads from a marketing standpoint.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, appreciate you listening in. If you made it this far, let us know if you want us to cover anything else.
For sure. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Steve Richards, or shoot me an email, srichards@hubspot.com. Thanks so much for listening if you made it this far.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, you got it, Micah. Cheers.